Cypress Development Corp's flagship lithium project is located just east of Albemarle's Silver Peak mine in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. A 12-hole exploration drill program for lithium-enriched claystone on Cypress's 100% controlled properties is now underway. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the Pink's CYDVF, and on Frankfurt's C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, publisher of TheBreaker.News. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Bob, the Nanaimo by-election, did it go the way we thought it would?
Well, I think it did. It was all about the NDP getting out its vote. And the difference is the NDP, because it's been in power so long in Nanaimo, really, except for once since 1972, that it has a machine there. And it's got a party culture there. It's got a large labor movement presence in Nanaimo, and it's got people that have moved over from the mainland because they've been priced out of the market to Nanaimo. It really is the kind of community where the NDP has a machine, whereas the BC Liberals really didn't, because they had lost so many times in the past, and because they had actually written it off as a riding that was not going to swing their way. And that was part of their problem, part of their history, and why they weren't able to make it over the hump this time, because the NDP candidate, Sheila Malcolmson, the former MP for the area, who quit being an MP to try to become an MLA, was able to successfully put some of those messages forward that while the Liberals were the government, and while Leonard Krogh was the longtime MLA, the Liberal government was not paying attention to the needs and wants of Nanaimo, specifically the hospital, the Nanaimo Regional General Hospital, which was a problem for so many years from a management standpoint, from a standpoint of the implementation of a digital health record system, to the consultant's report that was leaked to me in fall of 2017 that said that there was a toxic culture there full of bullying and nepotism, and people who worked at the hospital had such low morale and low faith and low confidence in management that they told their close loved ones that if they were ever able, or not wanting to, but if they were ever falling ill or injured, that they did not want to be treated at the hospital that was their workplace. They asked to be sent to the mainland. What kind of a slap in the face that was. A reasonable slap in the face, because so many people were saying it, that the culture there was so awful at the hospital. And that was one area which rubbed a lot of Nanaimoans the wrong way. So the NDP was able to motivate its base out to get there, and of course to point to the Liberal government of the past, that they were able to scare enough people in Nanaimo that, do you want to turn the clock back? Do you want to get to the point where it's 43 to 43 in the legislature and you're one step closer to an election that the Liberals could make a comeback in? Do you want to do that? Do you want to vote for Tony Harris and therefore vote for Andrew Wilkinson and get closer to that? They actually put out some flyers in the waning days of the election to remind people of what had been unearthed by the NDP since they came into power in 2017. Things like the ICBC dumpster fire, things like the situation with money laundering in casinos and real estate and unaffordable housing in southern BC, as well as more recently the Pluckus report on the corrupt activities in the BC legislature that really do tie in with the BC Liberals, because Craig James was a BC Liberal appointee as the Speaker, and a lot of this developed under the BC Liberals before Darryl Pluckus came in and blew the whistle. So the NDP was able to do that. Andrew Wilkinson's trying to put a happy face on this, because they did have a pretty decent showing in this by-election. Lost by about 2,000 votes. They were able to position Tony Harris, the son of the local car dealer and cell phone dealer from days gone by, the late Tom Harris. Tony Harris was able to position himself as this new face of the party, and that's what Andrew Wilkinson is trying to move forward with, and in some ways put lipstick on the pig with, that they had a good showing, more votes than they had in previous elections, and then they introduced a young, dynamic candidate, family man, local businessman to British Columbia. Maybe we'll see him again in another election, I don't know. But that's the kind of candidate that they're looking for, and Wilkinson had a post-by-election news conference where he said there's 3 MLAs, veteran MLAs, who are not intending to run in the next election. He didn't say who they were. We can guess who they might be. Possibly Rich Coleman, possibly Mike DeYoung, possibly Linda Reid, 3 of the people who have been with the Liberal caucus for several decades back in the 1990s, and also 3 people with significant baggage that the NDP would love to run against, would love to create some attack ads to highlight their presence in the Liberal team. But those may be the 3 people that Wilkinson was talking about. I know that Rich Coleman, of course, last year was looking at running for mayor of Surrey, and I know that he also has had his eyes on a run for the federal Conservatives, looking at the Surrey ridings, and now there's an opening in the Langley-Aldergrove riding because Mark Warawa is retiring as the Conservative MP. So could Rich Coleman be the first to step out? Now there isn't that pressure because there isn't the tie in the legislature, there isn't that suspense, there isn't that worry that, for the NDP at least, that the government's going to just suddenly fall. So where do some of the BC Liberal veterans go, and when do they go? The other question is about the Greens, who had a very disappointing result in the by-election. This was not what they had hoped. They ran Michelle Ney, the daughter of the great Mayor Frank Ney, the ambassador for Nanaimo, who was at the bathtub races and wore the Pirates suit. She got only just under 1,600 votes, just over 7% of the popular vote, which was quite a collapse for the Greens, who were in double digits in many ridings across British Columbia, especially on Vancouver Island, where they were quite popular during the 2017 election. What has happened to the Greens? Well, the Greens may no longer be the place where disaffected BC Liberals park their votes. The question might be, where did the Liberal vote that parked itself with the Greens in 2017 because Liberals didn't want to vote for Christy Clark and they didn't want to vote for the NDP? They went to the Greens in 2017. Well, in this by-election in Nanaimo, the snapshot of where the province is right now at least, did all those votes leave the Greens, go back to the Liberals? Did some of them go to the NDP? Big question there. This was an election that was fought differently. The NDP was, of course, attacking the BC Liberals' record and scaring people, basically saying, do you want to go back in time? Do you want to get closer to an election and potential return of the Liberals? Whereas the Liberals were really attacking the NDP on all the taxes. The NDP has put in place various taxes on, speculation tax on homes, empty homes taxes on houses worth over $3 million. Of course, they've increased ICBC rates, but again, they argue that they were the ones that inherited the mess, and they're just trying to clean up the mess that the Liberals left. But that's really the only way people have been able to attack the NDP is on taxation. Increasing taxes, and the way they've increased or rolled out those taxes, especially rolling out the speculation tax disclosure period during the by-election period. That was a bit of a gutsy move, and it does not appear to have cost them. There may be enough people in Nanaimo and other parts of the province who are unhappy with the unaffordable housing crisis that they're hoping those that do have more will pay more, and that as much as the Liberals tried to harness that energy in Nanaimo, they weren't able to use it to gain enough votes to overcome the orange tide. So the status quo remains. The Liberals are still in opposition. The NDP is still in government. And the question might be, will the Green Party and Andrew Weaver bite their tongues and stay to the end of the term and continue to support the NDP through the time that they have this supply and confidence agreement. Andrew Weaver's made a few noises, even during the by-election, that he wasn't happy with the NDP campaigning against the Greens and using scare tactics and trying to organize strategic voting, which shut the Greens out. And he suggested that he still holds the cards and still can pull the government down if the Liberals didn't win. He's huffed and puffed before, but not blown the House down. I wonder if he's near the end of his straw because, of course, the NDP went ahead and greenlit Site C. The NDP held the electoral reform referendum, and all signs point to that to being designed to fail, so that the electoral system didn't change, so that the NDP would still be neck and neck with the Liberals and shut the Greens out, but only go through the motions to tick that box to please Andrew Weaver. So I think we've got to look at where Andrew Weaver is now and watch him closely, see if he does get closer to pulling the plug on this, or if he will just bite his tongue and try to rebuild his party a little more to spread its base. And again, Andrew Wilkinson, he's coming up on the first anniversary of his leadership, and is he too late to the game when it comes to putting that message out there of renewal for the party?
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
I'm Douglas Mason, CEO of Naturally Splendid, symbol NSP on the TSX Venture Exchange. Naturally Splendid is a biotechnology and consumer products company focused on the global cannabis and health markets. Naturally Splendid is expanding distribution in this rapidly growing market with products currently in Canada, the USA, South Korea, Germany, and Australia. To view our comprehensive company presentation and for more information, please visit our website at naturallysplendid.com.
I'm Kelly Jennings, CEO of PowerBand Solutions. PowerBand is a cloud-based provider of auction, inventory, and finance solutions that make buying, selling, and financing vehicles more efficient. PowerBand Solutions trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol PBX and on the OTCQB symbol PWWPF and on Frankfurt symbol 1ZV. For more information, please visit us at powerbandsolutions.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, the BC legislature scandal involving the Sergeant-at-Arms, anything new there?
Yeah, Craig James and Gary Lenz. Craig James, the clerk who was suspended November 20th, and Gary Lenz, the Sergeant-at-Arms who was suspended November 20th as well. They have an extra week to file their response to the Plekas report that was announced today. The House leaders of the three parties decided to give them an extra week. Don't know all the circumstances, but you can probably assume that their lawyers wrote to the Legislative Assembly Management Committee and said, in order to file a complete response, we need some extra time. That was a 76-page report by Daryl Plekas, released on January 21st, and there's something on every single page. A lot of details there, plus a lot of the receipts. There's a lot of explaining to do by Mr. James and Mr. Lenz, who are under criminal investigation by the RCMP and two special prosecutors. This report that Daryl Plekas did release was on the non-criminal or the lesser accusations against them. A lot of questions about the way that they managed their affairs at the legislature under Linda Reid before them, because there was a suggestion that Linda Reid, while she was speaker, was not exactly terribly honest with the way she ran things. They'll need to file a response. I wonder if it will be 76 pages or even double 76 pages, and I wonder how they're going to respond as well, if they'll just respond through their lawyers to the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, or if they'll make themselves available to the media. This is a very sensitive time, of course. When I was over in Victoria for the release of the report, I knocked on Craig James' door. He didn't come to the door, his wife did. He was not willing to comment then, was just told he was busy at the time, but she said he was innocent. So that's their side of things. Of course, back in November, they held a news conference in Vancouver at their lawyer's office and said they did no wrong, and that they wanted their jobs back and they'd cooperate with the investigation. Well, we'll see what they have to say with all these documents that were released by Daryl Plekas, the correspondence, the receipts, the stories that Darryl Pluckus told in that report about traveling with Gary Lenz and Craig James, and about the way they did business and the way that they decided to claim money for expenses, and of course the schemes for retirement benefits, insurance benefits, and pay in lieu of vacation. There's some serious questions to be asked here, and we'll see what they say in their response to the Legislative Assembly Management Committee. That'll be the first big step forward. We're still waiting for the committee to get forward on its report on workplace conditions at the legislature, a workplace review at the legislature. They decided to do that unanimously after the report by Darryl Pluckus said that there were human resources problems in the legislature, that people who did speak out and were doing their job to try to make sure there was no waste, or simply ask questions about spending, people were fired. And Darryl Pluckus has offered to remove the non-disclosure agreement so those people can talk freely and offer their evidence. All these different issues are coming into play, and we'll see what they say. February 7th is supposed to be their deadline. We'll see if that report goes into the public realm quickly, or if it goes into the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, waits for it to meet, and then waits for it to release the report. It's interesting that the new date for this response to the committee is also shortly before the legislature reconvenes. February 12th is the throne speech. The legislature will be back in session in Victoria. It'll be the first session without Craig James and without Gary Lenz to start. Of course, they are still being paid. They're suspended with pay and benefits. That could be based on what's in their response to the committee. There could be a meeting by the committee to decide to change that, maybe go to the legislature and ask the legislature to terminate them entirely. We'll see if that happens, because they also have their legal bills being paid by the Legislative Assembly for the time being. This could go in so many different directions, but I think it's important we get a response from them so they can see if they can justify any of these expenses. However loony these expenses appeared in the Pluckus report, is there any explanation for them? Certainly the log splitter is going to be a big explanation. Like to see how they explain that, especially by keeping that equipment at Craig James' house instead of keeping it at the legislature grounds where there's plenty of room. And hospitality expenses, buying, the suits they did, the jewelry, the booze, why there appears to be no receipts for customs duty payments. Big question there, and why they held an event in the summer of 2017 down in Seattle, and why they went and spent a lot of money at restaurants in Seattle, and also Seattle Mariners game for a bunch of people who worked especially in Canadian legislatures to go down there and talk about business continuity, why they were spending Canadian dollars in the U.S. when there's pretty good baseball teams in British Columbia, the Harbour Cats in Victoria and the Vancouver Canadians in Vancouver. They're not major league, but those are good experiences to go to with people during the summertime, especially if you're having a business conference. There'll be questions about those kind of expenses too, so we'll have to wait and see what they say there. But in the meantime, the RCMP is investigating, and late word today that the Public Prosecution Service has finally come clean about the special prosecutor that it appointed in Chilliwack. Robin McPhee was appointed as special prosecutor in March of 2017, but we didn't know about that until today, when after more than a week of me prodding the RCMP and then the prosecution service for information about the status of the investigation into the theft at BC Liberal MLA for Chilliwack, John Martin's office, he went public back in March 2017 that a very large sum of money, tens of thousands of dollars, had been stolen from his office, and apparently one of his staffers confessed to it, and that staffer was fired. Here we are in early 2019, and we're only finding out now that a special prosecutor was appointed back then. It's apparently close to the charge approval stage, where the special prosecutor will decide whether to go ahead with charges and what charges those might be, but for that long period of secrecy, if it does get to court, I hope they do explain why they decided extraordinarily to delay the announcing of the special prosecutor by almost 2 years. So that's an interesting one because John Martin, the MLA, like all the MLAs at the time, was subject to what was going on at the legislature, where they were implementing a new centralized system for accounting and doling out all the money to the constituency offices. All the constituency offices are essentially satellite offices of the legislature. And, Craig James was very much involved in that, and don't know if any of the allegations concern him at all, or if it's just simply one person who was working in John Martin's office who was the target of this. But we'll see in the weeks, hopefully not months, whether the special prosecutor does decide that there are charges warranted in this case.
What about former Speaker Linda Reid's expense account? Are there questions about that?
Indeed, because of what appears to be billing on the same day for taxi rides as well as use of her own personal car. And this was identified by Connor Gibson, who was a legislative assistant, and he brought that complaint to the Speaker's office. Ellen Mullen, the Chief of Staff to Darryl Pluckus, took it to Gary Lenz, the Sergeant-at-Arms, as well as the Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms, and they actually had a meeting in 2018 to go over the allegations. And then shortly after that meeting, the allegations were basically discounted, and it didn't go any further. Gary Lenz apparently wanted to fulfill this investigation. He thought there was probable cause, something did happen, but he seemed to have been overruled. That Craig James and Darryl Pluckus at the same time were over on a mission in China, and there's language within the Pluckus report about how Pluckus was at breakfast with Craig James, and Craig James basically said the investigation was shut down. And then several weeks later, after coming home, Pluckus wrote that he was in conversation with the deputy clerk, Kate Ryan Lloyd, who mentioned that Craig James was over in Vancouver meeting with a lawyer who happened to be Jeff Plant, former Attorney General, and was getting advice about this situation. And she was told that he had basically got advice to shut down the investigation. So it appeared that when and then of course Connor Gibson was fired from his job at the legislature start of June 2017. He was told it was budgetary, but there's evidence that suggests that it was about him being a whistleblower, that him doing his job and saying that taxpayers' money was being wasted. So you've got the situation where there's questions about the legal advice that was given to Craig James at the BC legislature from a former Liberal Attorney General working for a Vancouver law firm that appeared to have informed a decision to end an investigation, as well as through other means and the employment of one of the Liberal aides who had actually been applauded in the legislature during the daily introductions of members of the public or other important people. He was actually commended for the job he did, but turns out a few days later he was given the boot. So that's going to be one to watch as well as the money that was spent by Linda Reid to improve the security at her office in Richmond at the Garden City Mall. If you are in the area at Blundell and Garden City, she's got her office there, and you'll notice that there's this big brown bulky bench near the curb. Well, it's bolted to the concrete. That's there not for the enjoyment of the public. That's there as a security measure so that people don't drive up over the curb and into the glass windows. And that has been a bit of a problem in Richmond in recent years. Some wayward drivers launching their cars from the parking lot into a retail window, but it hasn't been terrorist related. Not at all. It was more or less just poor driving. But Linda Reid, as Speaker, feared that her office could be targeted, and spent a lot of money to have that placed outside, as well as have a security system inside, have double-paned glass windows and the counter and other security measures. She also spent a lot of money apparently on the kitchen and the bathroom, which weren't really security related. That came under scrutiny by the RCMP. They found no reason why it should have been done, and apparently they also found no reason that they should lay charges about the money that was spent. But perhaps that will be something to look for in the future, and see if the investigators in this situation are going to take a second look at that, because that case of spending money for her riding office security, it still doesn't quite make sense, especially when she never received advice from the police that told her that this was a good idea to do. Again, the spending of the Legislative Assembly, the big problem there is the fact that it's not covered by the Freedom of Information law.
BC's Information Commissioner thinks that BC legislature accounts should be public and transparent. Your position?
Oh, absolutely. I called Michael McAvoy for his thoughts on this scandal, and he said that he had been, as well as his predecessors, urging this for such a long time, that there's 2,900, almost 3,000 public bodies in British Columbia covered by the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. These public bodies are both provincial and municipal. Of course, government ministries and crown corporations are at one end, but there's a lot of very small agencies and associations connected to municipal and provincial government that are very obscure. They're all covered by this law, and it doesn't seem to have caused any of them problems to operate. The legislature, of course, has this tradition of privilege that there has to be, based on the archaic notions of our Westminster parliamentary democracy, that there has to be a modicum of secrecy. I disagree with that, but that's what they say. That's what the tradition is, that they have to be able to make decisions and discuss things in a vacuum that's insulated from outside external influence and pressure. But Michael McAvoy said that principle of privilege could still be respected, because the right to information, the right to know, is not actually absolute. If you look at the FOI law we have, there's a number of exceptions that allow public bodies to censor the records before they get into the hands of the public. But what they can't censor, and it's been proven time and time again, they can't censor invoices. They can't tell us they can't keep the amount of money on a piece of paper away from the public's eye if that money is public money that was spent. Likewise, they can't keep away from the public eye contracts that a public body makes with a private contractor for goods and services. In his position is that the Legislative Assembly is not deserving of any special privilege or feature to allow it to keep away from us spending information. We should have a right at any time to get this, but at the time we don't, because in Section 3 of the law, that's where the Legislative Assembly is actually excluded from the law. So this is something that really does need to be rated and debated, and he's actually happy that because of this scandal, it is now in the public discourse, and he's calling for the NDP government to, when they get back to the legislature, to get something going, and not just on putting the Legislative Assembly under the FOI law, but also fulfilling the promise for the duty to document law, to create documents, something that when the Liberals were in government and the NDP was in opposition, the NDP was very aggressive in pointing the finger at the Liberals and asking why they were not creating documents and why they were deleting documents. Michael McAvoy, the commissioner, also wants penalties for deleting and destroying documents, something that we're still waiting for the NDP to do. So this is another case of this key law that we do have at our fingertips, which is intended to stop waste and stop corruption. If this was put in place over the Legislative Assembly, you're not going to stamp out all the waste and all the corruption, because sometimes it still happens, but you're going to put some pressure on there, this key check and balance, which is really, really needed, so that there would be prevention. There would not be another scandal of this nature in future if the people that worked in the offices of the clerk or of the sergeant at arms know that at any moment any member of the public can send an email to the government and say, I want to see his calendar, I want to see his expense account, I want to see his correspondence back and forth with so-and-so. If they are governed by that law, as cabinet ministers are, as Crown Corporation executives are, then they'll think twice. Anyone in that position would think twice about whether they should be taking a vacation on the taxpayer dime if it really is something that's value for money and needed for their job, or they'd think twice about whether they need to go to the fancy restaurant on a business lunch, or if they could go to somewhere a little more budget conscious, because again, they would have that drilled into their heads that that's taxpayers' money and it's also taxpayers' information.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Grand Portage Resources recently completed the 2018 drill program on its 100% controlled Herbert Gold Discovery property located in the prolific Juneau Belt in southeast Alaska. Drill results are expected through late 2018. Past drill results included numerous multi-ounce gold assays on multiple veins. Grand Portage trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTCQB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, the U.S. Justice Department has laid 13 criminal charges against Huawei, alleging fraud and measures to avoid U.S. sanctions against Iran. And apparently these allegations go back some 10 years, so this doesn't sound like some immediate political whim.
No, this is a very complex case now. The big news this week, of course, out of Washington, D.C., all the top officials in the law and order of the U.S. government got together for a news conference and announced the charges against Huawei and Meng Wanzhou, and there's two other people that were charged as well, but their names were redacted from the court action because they have not actually been arrested yet. So we don't know who those people are or where they are, and if they'll ever be arrested. But of course, Meng Wanzhou is living in Dunbar on her bail conditions, and she appeared in court the very next day to vary those bail conditions. Turned out that one of her sureties from December actually was not the surety after the day that he was supposed to be surety, because he didn't apparently have the requisite paperwork and identification to satisfy the court registry, so someone else stepped in temporarily. So the idea was that they held this court hearing to place the man, Robert Cheng is his name, as well as his wife, back onto the surety list and make sure that he put the requisite amount of cash or value, equity of his house, on the line as a guarantee that Meng Wanzhou would not skip the country. Robert Cheng was the real estate agent involved in the purchase by Meng Wanzhou's husband, Liu Xiaozhang, of the house in Dunbar and the mansion in Shaughnessy. So she's going to appear again in court in Vancouver March 6th. It was supposed to be February 6th, but they postponed it to March 6th because the Justice Minister has until the start of March, until March 1st, to decide about the application from the United States, which was formally delivered from the United States to Canada, requesting her extradition. The Justice Minister has the job of deciding whether that is legally sound and should go through. More than 90% of the time, when a foreign country which does have an extradition agreement with Canada, when it has a treaty, and when it produces its request and has a solid case, 90% of the time, it is referred to the courts. And the courts, of course, are independent here in Canada, and that was hammered home pretty quickly and swiftly after John McCallum, the ambassador of Canada to China, for the second time in just a few days last week, had, of course, had a bit of a bozo eruption and appeared to be meddling in the case This time around, of course, at lunch in Vancouver, he said it would be great if the United States dropped the extradition request against Meng Wanzhou. He definitely seemed to be under the influence of either Chinese government officials or of Canadian businesses that do business with China, fearing that the war of words between Canada and China will up the ante and also harm the economy. Trudeau didn't stand for it, and after the second time, he fired John McCallum. And then just a couple of days later was when the United States made its big splash and announced the charges, 13 charges, of course, in federal court in Brooklyn, and then another 10 in their court in Seattle. The ones in Seattle are connected to T-Mobile and how Huawei had an agreement with T-Mobile regarding confidentiality. It was allowed to go behind the scenes when T-Mobile was working on this mobile phone testing robot called Tappy. And T-Mobile found evidence and actually won in civil court, although not as big a sum as they wanted, that trade secrets had been stolen by Huawei. So that's part of the criminal indictments in Seattle. And, of course, the ones in Brooklyn are all about the sanctions with Iran. And most of the charges are about fraud or attempted fraud, as well as money laundering, with regard to how Huawei had a company incorporated by Huawei in Hong Kong called Skycom. The United States says that company essentially functioned as Huawei's Iran-based subsidiary in order to facilitate transactions that would get around the U.S. and European Union trade sanctions. So this is not so much a case about breaking the sanctions per se, but about acting in a fraudulent manner to induce banks to do transactions with Huawei and Skycom under the guise that Skycom was a legal entity on its own, and that Skycom was able to do business in the way it was structured that would not harm or breach the sanctions. So there's evidence that the U.S. has put into court that further shows that Meng Wanzhou was the one communicating with banks, telling them after Reuters had actually written stories about the situation, and basically told them that everything was above board and Huawei would never break laws, and that Skycom was properly incorporated. Well, the U.S. version is that Skycom was actually just basically a dummy company used to subvert the sanctions, and the way that Meng Wanzhou communicated that to the banks was fraudulent. So this case is going to get more interesting, but it probably is no resolution for months, if not years. These extradition cases could be dragged out for quite a while. And in fact, her defense lawyer, David Martin, told the judge in court that he's got members of another firm, Richard Peck, and a couple of his associates have joined the legal team. There's also a law firm from Toronto that's joined the legal team. So there's going to be a large group of lawyers crafting the defense for Meng Wanzhou. And I suspect that when it comes to time, if she does testify in her own defense, it could be a very, very packed courtroom where we might actually hear her voice and hear her defend her actions in this trial within a trial. Essentially, the judge has to decide whether there is good reason to send her back over to the U.S., where she could face charges of 20, 30 years in jail. But of course, the first big hurdle to get over is whether the Justice Minister does decide to approve, to rubber stamp the extradition application from the U.S. And of course, there's geopolitical ramifications there. As much as China has been very aggressive and ratcheting up this war of words, and also jailing arbitrarily Canadians over in China, you've got to wonder if the pressure might also be on the Trudeau government to do the right thing, because the other side of this equation is the United States, and you've got to wonder if the Canadian government will have a moment to think and decide to pick a side, because our nearest neighbor is a government which is similar to ours in many fashions, way of governing and way of life, trade partner. Canada has gone to war with side by side with Americans on numerous occasions. And China is a different story. As much as it is an important trade and tourism partner, as much as it is the homeland of many Canadians, it is also a country which does not respect the rule of law, does not respect independence of courts. It's a one-party system with severe human rights abuses, including the lack of free press and including the arbitrary jailing of human rights lawyers and journalists. It's a country with some severe problems that does not make it an ally of Canada. So Canada's in a bit of a tough position right now, and we'll see how the federal government gets Canada out of this. It could be as simple as just kicking it back to the courts and letting a judge decide. Canada should be proud of its legal system, its judicial system, its justice system as being independent. This ultimately shouldn't be something that is decided behind closed doors by a politician, but decided in an open court by a judge.
Bob, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, publisher of thebreaker.news. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet, our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.